It is a big honor and a big pleasure to be the master of ceremonies of this year's Jump Forum. Not only because it's in its 12th edition, it happens on the Women's Day, but actually because it happens in a very special Women's Day. We have been celebrating the achievements that were made 100 years ago by the movement of these pioneer, courageous women that we call suffragettes. So what better moment for us to gather our minds, our thinking, our emotions throughout the day and discuss the very important topics that we have to discuss around redefining and sharing sharing power around men and women, so that not only we can reinvent and redefine what leadership models we need, but also that we can have an impact in today's world. And as Isabella was explaining, we have come a long way in the last 100 years. We have major achievements. Our lives are very different today, and I am very grateful for that and the work of all the women and men that have allowed us to be here today. But these changes and the impact has been very, very slow. And when we get to the top positions where power really happens, we still see the imbalance huge. We see, for instance, that we have around 5% of women CEOs in the European Union's listed major companies. This is not enough. And when we hear the European Institute of Gender Equality saying that at this pace and without counting on setbacks that can happen, we still have another 100 years until women have equal access to the job market and equal pay for the same work. And we don't want to wait another 100 years. So we need everybody's energy, and we need our leaders to take the responsibility and move forward to a different pace, especially because this very slow pace in these changes doesn't have anything to do with the reality of the world that we're living today, a world that is living at a breakneck pace, where change happens all the time. We cannot cope with it. We're talking disruption. We're talking VUCA world, this volatile, unpredictable, complex, ambiguous world reality where we live today. We're talking fourth industrial revolution. We're talking about how artificial intelligence and developments in genetics and machines and algorithms are going to be more and more dominating our lives in the coming decades. And this reminds me, you know, I'm Portuguese, so I was raised with stories of sailors and navigators. And this reminds me, these conversations we're having today about the future remind me of these very beautiful handwritten maps, world maps, that our sailors had 500 years ago. And there were these tiny known territories, and of course around Europe and Portugal, by the way, and around there was this big sea full of snakes and dragons and monsters. Some were absolutely destructive. Some others would actually challenge you and then reward you with fantastic treasures. So today's world is a bit like this. We're navigating uncharted territory. We have foresight, of course. We have scenarios. We're all trying to adapt, become agile in our organizations, in our daily lives. But the reality is that this is unknown territory. And these changes are going to affect every single human being in this planet. Which brings me to the next point, which is by 2030, and this is very, very soon, the world population will be around 8.5 billion people. This is 1 billion more than what we have today, in less than 15 years. Imagine what this means to a planet that is already under pressure. We're talking climate change. We're talking resources, water. We're talking food. We're talking energy. So we're also talking tensions and conflicts and wars that will continue emerging around these limited resources. And this is not going to stop. And this also relates to other trends. Populism that grows in this space for fear and anxiety. We just saw the results of the elections in Italy. There's no reasons to be happy there. We see a revival of this toxic, authoritarian, alpha male role models. And, you know, you can all imagine some pink-haired guys and some muscle men in Russia and a few others around the world that do the headlines, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? We're talking pervasive sexual harassment. Isabella spoke about it quite a lot. I'm not going to get back there. And we're seeing regressions in human rights standards. And when we talk human rights, we talk women's rights, democratic standards, even without a space like the European Union, which is already a very privileged space. So this looks really grim and scary, all these serpents and all these dragons. But the fantastic thing about human beings is their resilience, is their capacity to collectively overcome challenges, even if they are huge. And one of the conditions for them to overcome these challenges is to work collectively, is to collaborate with each other, is to be aware that alone they cannot make it when the waves and the seas and the turbulence is too big. So today we're talking of a world that needs all the talent we can get. So we cannot waste the talent of 50% of the world's population, women. This is simply not sustainable, not acceptable. We have good news too. It's not just about green trends, blah, blah. We have good news. As Isabella was saying, 60% of our university graduates are women. Fantastic, what an immense talent pool. We have generally more rights, more protective legislation than ever. We have more financial and decision-making power. I mean, many of you are CEOs and managers. You know that women are a big part of your consumers base, and more and more. And we, of course, we have a very interesting trend happening with social media that affects the way influence and power can happen. And we just saw the example of the Me Too campaign, bottom-up influence, like that, happening on a very short time span using new technologies. Another piece of good news is that the business case for gender equality that has been developed and proved and reproved by the most prestigious universities and think tanks in the world is finally filtering down the different levels of our organizations in different sectors. So most of the enlightened decision makers I know, and probably you are all part of those, know that today women mean business. And Aviva has written an awarded book that has exactly that title. Women bring more innovation, problem solving, sustainability. We're talking performance, mirroring markets. We're talking the capacity to create collective meaning in a moment of transformation, of creating communities to lead them through change, because change is scary and it requires a set of skills called emotional intelligence. And this includes empathy, and this includes self-awareness, and a whole set of different skills. And even The founder of Alibaba, which is probably, as you know, one of the biggest Chinese multinationals, has said that the market for emotional intelligence is going to exponentially grow in the coming decades because those are the skills that machines will not be soon replacing. So women have been socially constructed for millennia to have these skills. So now is the right time to use them, right? But not to use them against, not to use them in competition with, but to create complementary systems where the men and the women who have these different skills that are needed for our world not only to adapt and find the right strategies for the coming decades, but actually to survive collectively so that we can do it together. So this is the perfect occasion. It is a perfect occasion to understand and value these talents, and it is the perfect occasion to get beyond those stereotypes that have been imprisoning all of us, men and women. We have been imprisoned by stereotypes and traditional roles. Our individual human potential has been limited, and this has been holding us back as societies, as organizations in general, okay? So we need to move beyond that. We need this kind of inclusive conversations that the JUMP Forum provides us the occasion to have with men and women, and I'm really happy to see a lot of diversity in the room, to look at a few questions. How can we pass from this power, this toxic power, the power for the sake of power, to the power with purpose? How can we pass from this power, from the sake of power, to power with responsibility? And how can we move beyond these old models of domination, power over other people, towards new paradigms of partnerships, value-driven, inclusive, responsible power definitions, power with the others, power to make changes that the world desperately needs. And since power is present at all levels of our societies, our first plenary is going to touch precisely how power happens from the boardroom to the bedroom and beyond. Because this is something that we are seeing happening. Gender equality starts at home, many say. Women and men, especially in the younger generations, are more and more adapting models of dual careers. Dual careers require also a share in dual carers, taking care of your family and your kids. But for this model, these new models, to actually be given the opportunity to consolidate, to grow, and to become the norm, societies need to adapt, and our culture and our mentalities, that in some cases are still in the 19th century, need to stop thinking and stop requesting men to be the biggest providers and women to be the biggest caregivers, so that each of us can have our share of pleasures and responsibilities, both at work and in our families. And to tell us much more about this, we have two fantastic thought leaders that will be talking to us and sharing their latest thinking.